Good afternoon and welcome to our presentation, TPMS Fundamentals. All you need to know about troubleshooting and servicing TPMS. My name is Mary Delavala and I am the editor of Tire Review and the moderator for this event. Today's webinar is sponsored by Schrader TPMS Solutions. TPMS service is a simple process that, unfortunately, can easily become overcomplicated. During today's webinar, we will guide you through the most important best practices concerning TPMS service and answer any specific questions through a Q&A session. Tire Review is committed to helping today's independent tire dealers run and grow a stronger, more competitive business. It reaches approximately 30,000 independent dealer locations. Before we get started, I'd like to address some housekeeping items. As part of this webinar, we will have a Q&A session where today's speakers will address as many questions as they can during the last portion of the event. Please submit your questions throughout the webinar to improve the chances of your question being addressed. Type your question into the Ask a Question box, then click the Submit button. This webinar is being recorded and it will be available on demand. We encourage you to direct coworkers to the recorded presentation. You'll receive an email with a link to the on-demand version in a few days on the Tire Review website. Looking at the widget bar at the bottom of your console, you'll see icons that allow you to open and close windows on your screen. You'll notice there is an icon for Facebook, as well as an icon that lets you send an email to a friend about today's webinar. There is also an option to print a certificate for attending today's webinar. You can access this by clicking on the yellow certificate icon. If you need help at any point during the webinar, click the question mark icon for some troubleshooting tips. And finally, if the slides stop advancing or if you are having problems with audio, try pressing the F5 key at the top of your keyboard. It will refresh the webinar console on your screen. Now I'd like to introduce our presenter. We are happy to have Yanick Leduc joining us today. Yanick is the Global Technical Training Team Lead at Schrader TPMS Solutions. His career at Schrader TPMS Solutions began in 2017 when he joined the company as a technical training and support specialist. Since January 2021, he has been leading Schrader's TPMS training team globally. Yanick has over 19 years of automotive experience, 15 of which have been in professional training. Now let's get started with today's presentation. Yanick, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the great intro. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here with us today. I'm very excited to welcome you to our TPMS Fundamental webinar. We have quite a session for you today, so let's get right into it. This is our agenda for the next hour. So we've put together a complete overview of the different TPMS systems, the different TPMS sensors, as well as some tips and tricks on troubleshooting. So as the webinar title says, it's really everything you need to know about troubleshooting and servicing TPMS. First thing first, TPMS stands for Tire Pressure Monitoring System, and it is represented by this little symbol in your dash. It is a mandatory vehicle safety system that alerts the driver when one tire or more is underinflated to a point where it is unsafe for driving. As mentioned, it is a mandatory vehicle system, and it is mandated in the United States since 2007. What are the key points of that legislation for you? So first of all, the legislation will target all the passengers vehicle, light truck, and buses under 10,000 pounds. Motorcycles and light-duty vehicles are excluded, but keep in mind that TPMS has proven its value to a point where we are seeing more and more motorcycles and heavy-duty vehicles now equipped with TPMS, even though it's not mandatory for that type of vehicle. The vehicle must be equipped with TPMS for all 4 tires. The spare tire is not required. Again, it's not because it's not legislated that it doesn't exist. So keep in mind that some vehicle may have TPMS sensors in the spare tire, especially a vehicle with a full-size spare. So TPMS must alert the driver when there's a system malfunction, and a TPMS must detect and warn the driver when the tire pressure is too low, which of course is the goal of TPMS. So how can you know? How can you identify which vehicle has TPMS? Let's say you have 2 cars in your shop, and how can you know where this one has TPMS and this one doesn't? Well, there's a few indicators that you can check. So you can check with the vehicle year. So if you were paying attention for the last few seconds, you know that TPMS is mandatory in the United States since 2007. But when the legislation was voted back in 2000, the implementation was done in 3 phases. The car manufacturer had to have 20% of their production with TPMS by the end of 2005, and then it was increased to 70% in 2006, and finally reached 100% in 2007. So we can safely assume that any passenger vehicle built after September of 2007 has TPMS. But what about the vehicle built before that? And keep in mind that TPMS, the first car with TPMS was back in 1985. So between 1985 and 2007, how can you know which one has TPMS and which one doesn't? You can also go with the vehicle type. So a mix of vehicle type and vehicle year will give you a good indicator. So TPMS is mandatory for passenger cars, light truck, and buses under 10,000 pounds. Motorcycles and light-duty vehicles are excluded, but again, as I was mentioning earlier, we're starting to see more and more of these vehicles now equipped with TPMS. So a good indicator would be the vehicle valve. Typically, the valve is a good indicator. The metal stem, typically valve with a metal stem will have a TPMS sensor attached to it. But some rubber stem also have a TPMS sensor attached to it. You just need to know how to recognize them. So these 3 types that we have here, first type has a longer brass neck. So by loosening the valve cap on those, you'll see that the rubber doesn't extend all the way to the end of the thread. So that's a good indicator that there's a TPMS sensor attached to it. The second and third one, they have a small rubber ridge, a circular or longitudinal ridge directly on the rubber stem. This can also guide you on if there's a TPMS sensor attached to that valve. So seeing any of these 3 rubber stem is a good indicator. But there is a better way. The most efficient and most quickest way to identify if your vehicle is equipped with TPMS is simply to look at the dash. The quickest and most efficient way to identify if your vehicle is to look at the dash. You want to look at the dashboard, and when you turn the ignition on, you want to see if all the light in your dash will illuminate for a few seconds and then shuts off. That's called the bulb check. You want to be able to identify if there's a TPMS light during that bulb check. If a TPMS light illuminates with all the other warning light and then goes off, this means that the vehicle is equipped with TPMS and the system is working properly. If the light stays on, or if the light starts to flash, you'll want to write this down on your work order, because we all know how it is. Sometimes the client will claim that the light was off before you started to work on the vehicle, and now if you haven't checked the light before, where you're stuck with the problem now. All right, so that's for the vehicle identification. Let's do a quick overview of the system, how the system works. So now that you know that by seeing the light in the dashboard, it's telling you that the vehicle is equipped with a TPMS. But does it mean that it has sensors in the wheel? Not necessarily. What you need to know is that there's 2 types of TPMS systems. There's direct TPMS and indirect TPMS. Let's start with direct TPMS for this exercise. Here's how it works. So the pressure sensors are installed in each of the tires, And the sensor's job is to transmit pressure, temperature, and sensor ID. The vehicle, the wheel of the vehicle is installed on the vehicle, of course. And when the sensor starts to detect a wheel rotation over a certain miles per hour, it will send a radio frequency. It will use radio frequency to communicate the TPM data to the vehicle's receiver. The receiver will then get the information and transfer the information to your vehicle ECU, to the computer of the vehicle, who will then display that in your dash. So on your dash, you'll have all the information, pressure by location, which wheel has 32 psi, which wheel has 33. That's how the system will work. Whenever the air pressure in one of your tires deflates rapidly, or if the pressure gets too low, to a point where it's considered unsafe for driving, the sensor will send an alert to the computer in order to turn on the TPMS telltale, the solid TPMS light. But how much air do you need to lose in one tire in order to be considered unsafe for driving? The answer is 25%. 25% under the recommended tire pressure. That's when the sensor will send an alert to the computer in order to turn on the telltale. That TPMS light, the solid TPMS light, is going to stay on, and it's going to stay on solid until the pressure in that tire is corrected. The key information is 25% under the recommended pressure. But where can you find that recommendation? On your information placard, usually located on the driver door pillar. The same placard you would check to know what is the recommended tire size. That's where you'll have that's where you'll find the recommended pressure for the vehicle. That's what the vehicle computer will set as a tire pressure expectation. So whenever the sensor reports pressure under that 25% of 29 psi, whenever the sensor reports a 25% under that 29 psi, the computer is programmed to illuminate the TPMS light on the dash. And that's how it goes. Each sensor will transmit data every few minutes or so, and will continue to transmit unless the tire stops rotating. If ever the vehicle doesn't receive information from one of the sensor or more, again, within a certain time frame, the vehicle will turn on the malfunction indicator light. It's the same light as a telltale. It's that same TPMS light, but it's going to flash instead of being solid. And here's a trick. Every time you turn the ignition on, the light will flash 60 to 90 seconds and then remain solid. So it's really important to look at the light at ignition. If you check at the light 60 seconds too late, you might be missing important information. That's for direct. Now for indirect. Indirect works on a different system. It works differently. There's no sensor installed in each wheel. The sensor will use ABS speed sensor to estimate the pressure inside the tire. When the air pressure drops in one tire, the overall diameter of that wheel will slightly reduce to a point where that wheel will start to rotate faster than the other ones. When the ECU captures all that, he's able to understand that one wheel is rotating faster than the other ones. That's how the system will assume that this tire is running on low air tire. But it's the same light. It's a different TPMS system, but it uses the same light requirements, so solid light if it's a pressure issue, and a flashing TPMS light if it's a malfunction, a system malfunction. So now that you guys have a better idea on how the system works and which vehicle has TPMS or not, I just want you to go through a quick checklist. I want you to go through a quick 5-point checklist that you should do before servicing the vehicle. This will protect you and your shop from liability. With that, you're going to be able to identify pre-existing damage, ensure that you inspect every aspect of the system, and ensure that you collect all the information you need if ever you need to replace a sensor. And the first item on the checklist is exactly what we've just reviewed. Check the light. When you turn the ignition on and all the lights in your dash goes on, then off, that means that it's a bulb check, means that your vehicle is equipped with TPMS and the system is properly functioning. If the light turns on and stays solid, what you'll want to do is do a full ignition cycle again, so off and then on, just to confirm that the light is really on solid and not flashing. If it stays on solid, what you'll want to do is check what is the pressure value on your door placard, and then check the pressure in the tire with your stick gauge. Don't forget to check that full-size spare. If the vehicle is equipped with a full-size spare, there's a strong chance that it has TPMS sensors in the spare. If the light is on and starts to flash, then you know it's a system malfunction. In that case, what you'll want to do is test each of the sensor with your TPMS diagnostic tool. Of course, what you'll want to do is note everything on your work order, whatever it is. If it's system okay, solid light, or flashing light, write it down on your work order. This way you're protecting you and your shop from liability, and by notifying your client right away, you won't end up on paying on something that you didn't break. Item number 2 on our checklist is check the valve. You want to be able to identify any pre-existing damage on that valve. I'm sure everyone here has seen these situations a few times, and we're talking about corroded valve stem or cracked rubber stem. And the worst part is that in many cases, these situations are caused by someone somewhere or some other shop that did not service the valve last time they serviced the tire. Guys, I cannot stress this enough. The valve stem needs to be serviced every time you break a wheel and tire. With the sun and the heat, the rubber on that valve stem will dry out and crack. It needs to be replaced every time you break down a wheel and tire. The aluminum valve stem can corrode to a point where all the components inside get seized and bond together. And if the car is equipped with a one-piece fixed angle valve, if you break the valve stem on that, it means that you need to replace the whole sensor unit. What you want to do is identify any pre-existing damage. And you'll know right away just by looking at the valve which one is going to give you a hard time. You're not just collecting information on your work order. You're protecting you and your shop from liability of any pre-existing damage. Start with a 2-finger twist test. All right? If you can't get out that valve cap with just 2 fingers, stop it right there. Don't reach out for that plier. Instead, go and see your customer and tell him that the fancy chrome plated cap that he installed on his valve has now created galvanic corrosion with the metal, and it's now seized. You'll try to remove it without breaking it, but just so he knows that if ever you break the valve stem, you might need to replace the whole sensor. Galvanic corrosion can also happen inside the valve stem. You get galvanic corrosion when you mix 2 dissimilar metals and you add a little bit of heat, a little bit of moisture, some dirt in there. That's exactly what happens when you mix the wrong valve core with the wrong valve stem. There are 2 types of valve core, brass and nickel plated. The rubber stems comes with a brass core. The aluminum stems come with a nickel-plated core. If you insert a brass core into an aluminum stem, you'll get galvanic corrosion. In just a few months, you'll get galvanic corrosion. That means that next time this customer is coming to your shop, you'll get problem getting that valve core out of that valve core chamber. You can avoid all that by using service kits. Replace all the wearable component of the valve every time you break down a wheel and tire. So a quick recap on that second point on the checklist: check the rubber valve, check for pre-existing damage, check the valve cap, look for corrosion outside and outside, and check if you have the proper service kit in stock before dismounting the tire. Again, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but note everything down on your work order. If there's any pre-existing damage, you'll want to write it down on your work order. Leave a trace. All right. Third item on our checklist is check the sensor. So just like you check for pre-existing damage with the valve, you want to check for pre-existing sensor malfunction from inside the tire. For that, you're going to need your TPMS diagnostic tool. You take your diagnostic tool and you want to set it to the right make, model, and year. Now, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say, come on, Nick, that's easy to do. Anyone can do that. Wait a second. Don't get too excited. When you look up a vehicle on your tools database, every information counts. You got to be careful when selecting the model. Special edition or different trim level within the same model year sometimes can use a totally different TPMS sensor requirement. If your tool lists a special edition or a different trim level on a separate line like this, like the example that we have here, the chances are is that the Focus and the Focus RS is using two different sensor protocol. Therefore, you cannot mix one with each other. If you try to scan the sensor, a Focus with your tool set as a Focus RS, it's not going to work. After selecting the make and model, you'll need to choose the model year. Again, you also need to be careful on this one because just 1 year difference can do total different sensor. Can make all the difference in the world. Like the example that we have here, two vehicles, same body style, same body design. They haven't changed the engine, they haven't changed the transmission at all. But between 17 and 18, they've changed the sensor protocol completely. It's not even the same frequency at that point. So, and for that, you should not rely only on the information on your work order or what your customer is telling you. He might have purchased that car in 2018, but the car is actually 2017. Always validate the model year with the 10th character of your VIN. Only the 10th character of your VIN will give you the right model year for that vehicle. So if you selected the make, the model, and the year, you validate with the 10 digit on your VIN. If that wasn't enough, you also need to choose a qualifier. So you select make, model, year, and now you need to check, is it steel wheel or alloy wheel? Is it with tire fill alert or without tire fill alert? Is it US made or Japan made? That means that within the same production year, the company used 2 or even 3 different sensor protocol. The real question is, how can you tell? Can you really see through the tire and see that the sensor is a 315 or a 433 megahertz? The best way to know what protocol is used by the vehicle is to test the sensor. Test your sensor with your tool. If you're getting a reading with your tool on a specific protocol, you can safely assume that a new sensor program on that same protocol will work just fine. Quick recap on the third item, check the sensors. You want to be able to identify any pre-existing damage, determine what's the right sensor protocol to use, and identify what is the right tool settings for that vehicle. Again, write everything down in your work order. If there's any missing sensor, if the sensor didn't pick up the first time, if you have any specific settings that you need to put your tool on, what's the trim level, all that, I strongly suggest that you write everything down you can avoid other situation afterwards. Fourth item on the list is check the vehicle computer. This one is quite important, especially on vehicle if your vehicle comes into your shop with a flashing TPMS light, with a malfunction indicator light. I know what you're going to say. I bet yet you're all going, Nick, why do you want me to check the ECU if all I do is tire service? Again, we're keeping the same line of thoughts in, and the checklist is to protect you and your shop from liability, any pre-existing situation. The key here is pre-existing situation. Failing to check the vehicle's computer can cause situation where the client will think that you broke something, or will think that you haven't done your job properly. And let me prove my point. Imagine the following scenario. Client brings his car in for service, and he has a TPMS light. The TPMS light is on flashing. So you use the checklist and you identify that TPMS light is flashing, so you know it's a sensor malfunction. You check all 4 valves, so all 4 valves are okay. You know you'll be able to safely remove them without breaking it. So you take your TPMS tool and you test each sensor, and you identify that the front left isn't working. So you sell the job to your customer, replace that front left sensor, repair is done, customer leaves, everyone's happy. He then comes back the very next day with the same TPMS light on, flashing. So you test all 4 sensors again just to realize that the right rear sensor isn't working. If you would have checked that computer, if you would have connected that TPMS tool to your computer, you would have seen that there were multiple DTCs recorded. There were multiple diagnostic trouble codes recorded flagging the sensor malfunction on all 4 tires, meaning that the battery for all four of these sensors have reached their end of life. Usually all 4 OE sensors have been installed all on the same day. So if one sensor is starting to die on you, the other ones are following close by. Now, I'm not saying this is every time the same, you should change all 4 sensors every time. But by retrieving the DTCs from the vehicle computer, when a TPMS light is on, of course, this will help you to identify if there are other TPMS related issues that might have not been detected at the moment of service. So you'll be able to see if it has recorded any previous TPMS related issue. Recap on that 4th item: check the vehicle computer for pre-existing sensor malfunction that cannot be detected at the time of service. Of course, just like all the other points, you want to write it down on your work order, because the 5th item on our list is exactly what you want to communicate to your customer. What recommendation do you have for your customer? Leave notes on your work order. If the client comes back, you'll have written information to refer to. There's even some tool that will offer you some printing features directly on your tool, either through a dedicated printer or through a PC connected on the same Wi-Fi network. These little reports, I'm telling you, these little reports are very handy, especially during tire changeover. So that's a quick recap on our 5-step checklist. Check the light, solid or flashing. Check the valve for any pre-existing damage. Check the sensor, any missing sensor. Check the vehicle computer for any sensor malfunction recorded in the computer. And finally, report your findings to your client. Now that you've done a full system diagnostic, you can determine if the sensor actually needs to be replaced. If it does, there's a few options available to you. All in all, you have 3 types of sensor. The main aspect that sets them apart is the vehicle application. And just so we're all on the same page, what is a vehicle application? Vehicle application, or vehicle protocol, you can visualize it as the language used by the sensor to communicate with the vehicle. Since every vehicle has different TPMS requirements, different application will communicate with different vehicle. Therefore, when choosing a new sensor or when installing a new sensor, you need to make sure that this new sensor will speak the same language as the vehicle you're installing it on. So let's check that first type of sensor, OE replacement sensor, or OER, direct fit. This type of sensor is designed to replicate exactly what the OE sensor would do. It has one sensor protocol. It has one vehicle application already written on the sensor. And this type of sensor is set with only one application that cannot be changed. The sensor will transmit TPM data through the vehicle application so that it can be only decoded by vehicle from a specific make, model, and year. The sensor is ready to use straight out of the box, and you just need to install it in the rim and mount your tire. But don't get me wrong. When I say only one application, it doesn't mean that it works on only one make and model. Some OE replacement, like the example that I have here, can be installed on quite a long list of model year. I've just copied a few here, but this means that all these vehicles are using pretty much the same sensor part number. But of course, if you want to keep OE replacements in stock, you'll need to keep many different SKUs in order to be ready for any vehicle that stops by your shop. So OE replacement sensor, it has only one vehicle application. It's ready to use straight out of the box. But to have a maximum vehicle coverage, you need to keep many different part numbers in stock. What if we compare that with the multi-application sensors? So knowing that you can cover a few different models with one application, imagine if we put multiple applications onto the same sensor. That's exactly what you have with multi-application sensor. You have multiple applications preloaded on the sensor, and the sensor will transmit each of these protocols in a sequence. It's always going to transmit that same sequence over and over again. You can't really select which one you want, but the sensor will keep on transmitting all these applications one after the other over and over again. Of course, that allows you to install that same sensor on a very long list of vehicles. But can you cover all the vehicle with just one sensor? No. If you want to be sensor ready for any vehicle that stops by your shop with multi-application sensor, you still need to keep a few different part numbers in stock. So multi-application sensor, have a few vehicle application preloaded on the sensor. The sensor is ready to use straight out of the box, but in order to have maximum vehicle coverage, you still need to keep a few different part numbers in stock. A lot less than compared to an OE replacement sensor, but still a little inventory to carry. But this brings an interesting question. How many applications can you fit onto one sensor? Can you fit everything onto one sensor? Almost. Programmable sensor or universal sensor. Some people call them universal sensor because you can program pretty much anything on that sensor. Programmable sensor, it doesn't have any application at all preloaded. Instead, you have any application that you want available at your fingertips through your TPMS programming tool. There's practically no limit to the amount of application you can have on a programming tool. All you need to do is transfer the application from the tool to the sensor. Once the vehicle application is transferred to the sensor is now ready to replicate exactly what the OE sensor would do. This allows you to have the sensor you want when you want it with only one SKU, only one part number to keep in stock. In addition to that, programmable sensors are future-proof. And what I mean by that is by keeping your tool up to date. Your tool will always receive the latest vehicle application for new vehicle. So when a new vehicle is being introduced on the market, even though you've purchased that tool a few years ago, you're still going to be able to program a new sensor for that specific vehicle. But you need to keep your tool up to date. Programmable sensor, recap, it can be programmed on any application, but the application needs to be transferred from a TPMS programming tool. To have a maximum vehicle coverage, you only need to keep in stock one part number, and the programmable sensors are future-proof. So out of these three different TPMS types, Schrader offers you two. So Schrader have OE replacement sensor for more vehicle application that you can think of. And we also have our well-known OE quality programmable sensor, Easy Sensor, that covers 99% of the vehicle in operation. But programmable sensors and relearning are two completely different things. Let me show you how to program a sensor first. So programming a sensor, quite easy to do. What you need to do is, first of all, as we've mentioned earlier, you want to be able to select your vehicle. So you go here and you select the sensor you want to program. You select Easy Sensor. And let's say we want to program a Dodge Ram 1500. Let's take any vehicle. And here you can see we have some qualifiers here, DS or DT. Let's choose first one here. Easy Sensor, you want to place your sensor in front of the tool. You select Create a Sensor ID, and you're ready to program your sensor. You want to wait until all the way that progress bar goes all the way to the end, and that you have a confirmation sign with a little beep at the end telling you that the sensor is fully programmed. If you remove the sensor too quickly, you'll then end up with a sensor that might not have received the full software in order to be programmed for that vehicle. So that's how you program an Easy Sensor. Now, programming is the action of uploading the app code onto the sensor itself. So you're taking your tool, you're uploading the app code onto your sensor. After that, the sensor will communicate that code that can be only understood by a vehicle you've selected, but the vehicle needs to accept that transmission. It's like pairing your phone to your car with Bluetooth. The car needs to get that virtual handshake in order to accept the transmission coming from that new sensor. So to see, here's how it works. So to avoid signal interference with other vehicle, each sensor has its own ID. The vehicle needs to learn or record the ID of each sensor installed so it can ignore the signal coming from others' vehicle around. But when replacing a sensor, the technician needs to relearn that new sensor ID onto the vehicle, just like pairing your phone with your car on a Bluetooth. The new sensor and the vehicle needs to do that virtual handshake. That's why on your tool, every relearn process for every vehicle is documented. You just need to select the service menu and look up the vehicle. And here, guys, I'm telling you, I am begging you, read the procedure. By selecting the whole, read the procedure as it is on your tool. Take notes if you have to. Keep in mind that there is no standards in the way you're doing relearn. You need to drive 15 minutes. Others will say you need to drive 12 minutes. Others will say you need to connect to OBD. The others will say you need to deflate. Do exactly what's written on your tool's procedure. And you see, when you look at the procedure, you see that little arrow there at the bottom. This means that there's more information. You need to press a down arrow to read it more. Read the procedure completely Take notes if you have to. People are saying that some vehicles are very hard to proceed with the relearn, like Toyota. But if you read the procedure completely, you'll see that Toyota has some very specific guidelines on you need to scan sensor, and then you turn the ignition on and scan the sensor a second time, and then some will even ask you to turn the engine on, running, and then scan the sensor a third time. Read your procedure completely. Don't assume that you know it all. Typically, there are 3 types of relearn: auto relearn, stationary, and OBD. Auto relearn, pretty easy to do. You just drive 15 minutes over 50. Read the procedure first and check how much time do you need to drive, up to how much speed do you need to drive. So a certain speed for a certain amount of time, this what will get the relearn to work on the vehicle. What you need to keep in mind is it always needs to be uninterrupted driving. If it asks you to drive 15 minutes, if you stop at a red light after 5 minutes, you're going to need to redo that whole relearn procedure again. So that's why most tools will recommend to do highway driving. This way, you're not going to stop every 2 minutes, and you're making sure that you're driving over that speed limit that is required for relearn. So drive certain number of minutes over a certain speed, and this is how the sensor will communicate with the vehicle in order to have your relearn procedure completed. Second relearn is stationary relearn. You probably have seen that in the past. You need to put your vehicle on relearn mode. To do that, some vehicle will requires you to press on the brake, cycle the key for 3 times, press on the brake, cycle the key 3 times. You get the horn to chirp. Other, you need to press on the lock and unlock for 5 seconds. Other, it's through the instrument control. Again, look on your tool procedure and it will guide you on how to do it. The key is you want to have that horn chirp. You want to have that vehicle that turns into a relearn mode. When it gets on that relearn mode, then you take your activation tool and you activate each sensor in a sequence. Respect the sequence that is written on your tool. Usually left front, right rear, and left rear. But there's always exception. Check on the procedure on your tool. Every time you activate one sensor, you'll get that horn to chirp, telling you, it's giving you the cue that the vehicle has accepted that new sensor ID. So you need to take in consideration the order that you need to do your scanning and the time limit. There's always a time limit in which you have to scan all 4 sensors in order to have the relearn completed successfully. The last one is OBD relearn. Everything is done through the tool. You collect all 4 sensor ID with your tool. Sensors ID are saved on the tool, and then by connecting your tool with an OBD cable, the tool will upload those new sensor ID on the vehicle. These one can be a little tricky because you don't have a confirmation that it works. I'll go even further. Sometimes the tool will tell you relearn complete, but it's not complete. And that's why it's really important to read that procedure. The tool will say relearn complete, but it's not complete. You actually need to unplug your tool and scan all 4 sensors again. Like on a Honda, you need to unplug your tool, deflate the tire, re-inflate the tire, and then drive for 15 minutes. Mitsubishi will ask you to leave the tool connected, but go scan the front left again. Please read your procedure. They all have these little difference from one model to another. There's no standards in how you should do a relearn. Be specific, especially on OBD. Follow those steps, step by step. in order to have your relearn complete successfully. So that's how you proceed for relearning on a vehicle. But what if you don't want to relearn? Because we have that question a lot. What if you don't have the time to drive 15 minutes over 15 miles per hour? Well, there is another procedure, which you got to be careful on when you select that. So as you know, relearn process, every sensor has its own ID, and whenever you want to replace a sensor, you want to be able to relearn that new sensor ID to your vehicle. If not, you're going to just keep on getting a flashing light. What if instead of doing that, when the sensor goes bad, you take your tool and you read the sensor out of the old ID, program a new sensor with that same ID. Let me just run that animation to you again. An old sensor goes bad, you take your tool and you read the sensor out of the old ID, put it onto a new sensor, and put that on the vehicle. The vehicle will never know that you've changed a sensor. It's the same sensor with the right app code and the same sensor ID as it was there before. The car will never understand that you've changed the sensor. That way, you don't need to do a relearn. You got to be careful though, because you're never fully 100% sure that the full process has been completed successfully until you do a full road test and a full sequence of that TPMS, the TPMS transmission. Also, you need to have a working sensor in order to copy the old ID if you do a copy by activation, or you need to be able to retrieve the sensor ID from the car computer if you do a copy by OBD. But copying a sensor might get you out of some situations sometimes. You got to be careful. If you want to copy a full set of IDs, then the sensor from the old set into the new set can create some interference and can create that light to come on again. So you got to be careful, but again, copying a sensor can get you out of some situation. So how would you copy a sensor ID? Pretty much the same process as programming a sensor. All you need to do is choose your make, model, and year. So I have an old sensor here from the Mitsubishi, and they were 2011. And the process is actually written on your tool. You select copy sensor ID, and it tells you place the original sensor in front of the tool. So the tool will activate the sensor in order to get the sensor ID right here, and then you're ready to put on your new sensor in front. Programmable sensor. Copying a sensor is done only with programmable sensors. You go here and you program that sensor. So now that programmable sensor will have this app code transferred from the tool, but also using the same sensor ID as we have written on that sensor. So that's how you copy a sensor. I'm done with my presentation. I just want to finish off by letting you guys know that you can give us a call from the moment that you're using Schrader product. You can give us a call. Don't be a stranger. 1-800-288-1804. We're open Monday to Friday, 8 to 8. We're even open on Saturdays, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Or you can drop us a quick email, schraderna@sensata.com. Also invite you to take a quick look at our website, schradertpms.com. You have tons of information on there. You can look up vehicle, what's the OE part number, is it compatible with Easy Sensor, what's the service kit part number. There's also a mobile app where you can get all that same information. You'll look up vehicle, what is the part number. You even have a troubleshooting app integrated into that little mobile app. Very nice, strong, and it's free. strongly suggest you to give it a try. Training offers us as well on our website. Don't miss our Schrader Academy. You get videos, you get the tech talks, you get the fully online 5 modules training that you can have. Great if your shop hires a lot of new technicians, especially for the tire season. 5 module, about an hour and a half. You have all of them done, and your technician will know that new employee will know how to mount and dismount a tire without breaking the sensor. He will know what TPMS is. He will know how it works, what the different frequency, and how to service the sensor and the valve, of course. So we are ready to proceed with some questions right now, and I've exceeded my time quite a bit. Not sure if I'm going to be able to answer all of your questions. Let me just go ahead with the question. First question, Alex. Other than TPMS solid and TPMS flashing light, is there any other warning lights on the dashboard related to TPMS? Yes. You have the solid light for pressure, and you have the flashing light for system malfunction. Some vehicle, especially those that had TPMS before the legislation came in, some vehicle will have a TPMS light and another dedicated telltale that says TPMS in plain letters. So if you have your light and that other dedicated light illuminated at the same time, this will also mean a system malfunction or just that TPMS in plain letter. If you have a dedicated telltale just for system malfunction, that's how the legislation says it. The legislation says you need to have a light for the pressure and a light for a system malfunction. It can be the same light displayed differently, or it can be 2 different light in your dashboard. That's how the legislation says it. Second questions, what is the best tool available today, and what is can you program easy sensors with good one. We have that question a lot. I actually have a slide just for that. Let me just find that slide right here. These are all the tools that you can program easy sensors with. If you have any of these tools in your shop today, you can program easy sensors. What you need to keep in mind is there's a lot of tools available in the market today that are locked to program only one type of sensor, only one brand of sensor. So perfect example for that is my S41 right here. S41 is the Schrader private label tool, which you can only program easy sensor with that tool. So the advantage of that is you can get these types of tool at a very good price. You got to be careful if you choose a tool that is locking you in with a specific sensor. What is the coverage of that sensor? Because if you buy a tool and the sensor only has an 80 or a 90% coverage of the vehicle, this means that every time you're gonna be servicing a vehicle that is not covered by that sensor, not only can you won't be able to use a sensor to program on that vehicle, but that tool will be useless. You would actually need to get a second tool, because the tool won't be able to program that sensor for that vehicle. The only tool on the market that is, to my knowledge, the only tool in the market that is private label that is not locked are the Continental TPMSD and the S56. This tool, like the Schrader S56, if ever you get onto a vehicle that is not supported by Schrader, 1%, so if ever you get that odd vehicle that is not covered in the easy sensor list, the tool will actually have that feature of letting you program other types of sensor. And just like the Continental TPMS-D here, whenever you get on a vehicle that is not covered by Continental, the tool will give you, do you want to program an easy sensor? So it gives you that flexibility. Not every tool has that, so you want to keep that in mind when you're choosing a new tool. What is the best tool? The best tool on the market for you guys is really the best tool that gives you the most bang for your buck. You get tons of features, very nice features on these tools, but it's not worth it if you spend a lot of money on a great tool, but you don't use all of these features. You know, I see shops with like a tool that is very expensive, but they're using half of the feature in there. Do you need to do in your shop? Do you need to do placard change? You need to do trailer TPMS? Do you do a tread gauge report? Are you printing out report? Do you connecting on Wi-Fi? These are all very nice features, but you need to know how to use these features if you have it on your tool. What's the best tool for you? The one that fits your need, really. Coverage-wise, you want to go for a tool that either gives you, that is unlocked, that can program any sensor on the market, and that you have easy sensors in there, of course. You know, I work for Schrader. But the tools that will give you the most coverage. Tools that are locked to only one sensor, you got to be careful. You got to trust that sensor company as someone that will give you the right OE information and protocol, and that at least gives you that flexibility to program other types of sensors. I have only 1 minute left. Zach, Ford push button relearns and Chrysler OBD relearn. Ford push button relearns, it's the same cycle. Press on the brake, cycle the key 3 times, but on the push button, it's on, off, on, off, on. So 6 times, then press on the brake, on, off, on, 5 times. So press on the brake 6 times, press on the brake 6 times. You got to be careful on that hazard relearn on Ford. When you press on hazard 3 times, the horn chirps for relearn. This works, but only if you do a tire rotation. If you changed the sensor ID, if you replace the sensor and it's a new sensor ID, it's not going to work. You need to do that, press on the brake and the push button. The OBD relearns for Chrysler have their security gateway since 2017, 2018. You cannot write new information through OBD. Perfect relearn is to drive the vehicle just like any Chrysler product. There are some companies out there that will offer you that special tool, special cable that overrides that security. I'm not comfortable with that. I would not recommend that you use that. You need, Chrysler's is really adamant on that. FCA is really adamant on that, where you need a license and an approved equipment to go in and write information onto the computer. Just having that separate equipment, I don't know. Right way of doing relearn on Chrysler is to drive certain number of minutes over a certain speed. I've exceeded my time. I'm terribly sorry, guys. Guys, thank you so much. Thank you very, very much for everything. Any more questions, you guys call the 1-800 number, 1-888-288-1804. Thank you so much. Back to you.
Yanick, thank you for the great presentation and for fielding all of those questions. I'd like to remind our audience that a recording of this webinar will be available on the Tire Review website in the next few days. Feel free to log in to view it again or to encourage colleagues to also view it. Also look for a follow-up email directing you to the on-demand version of the webinar. This concludes our webinar. Thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.